All right, so thanks for your patience. I'm going to get going and other people can just catch up along with us as they go. So thank you very much for coming. I know this topic has been of concern for lots of people as the food scraps ban went into effect in July, and sorry that it's taken so long to get this opportunity out to you, but hopefully this is just step one of a bigger process of trying to get the word out to folks who are concerned. So please pass the info along to fellow property managers, landlords, anybody you know that this might be relevant to. We'll be offering this webinar more frequently, and I'm also available to do individual online training sessions to help at your particular community, if that would be of use. So again, my name is Robin Orr. I'm the Event and Community Outreach Coordinator, and I'm joined here for technological assistance and informational backup by two colleagues, Rhonda and Ethan. Do you want to introduce yourselves quickly?
I'm Rhonda Mace. I do all of the school outreach for Chittenden Solid Waste District.
And I'm Ethan Hausman. I'm business outreach for CSWD, which certainly overlaps quite a bit with the work Robin does with landlords.
Indeed. So let's get going. Today we're going to talk about three topics and then get into your questions. First off, what is required and why? Then we'll talk about who is responsible. Finally, how to make it happen. And then we'll get into your questions. First, just a quick introduction for those of you who may not know. The Chittenden Solid Waste District is a public entity serving all the communities in Chittenden County. We are not the people who pick up your trash or anything like that. We are the people who try to help you reduce the amount of waste you generate. And we also provide convenient drop-off centers where people can get rid of their regular household trash, their household recycling, and then a lot of additional materials that can't be disposed of through one of those methods can be brought to us, whether you're a customer of ours for trash and recycling or not. We have 7 drop-off centers that take various things. We also have Green Mountain Compost operation, which takes larger loads of food scraps, and they take leaves and yard waste from everybody, and there's no charge for the leaves and yard waste. And we have the our hazardous materials facility, which is open year round. Not everybody knows that, and not a lot of districts have that. So we are very lucky to have an actual facility that operates year round. So any of those cans of paint, cleaning chemicals, anything you are needing to get rid of when you do apartment cleanouts or after renovations, you can set up an appointment and bring those down to our environmental depot in South Burlington. So getting into the meat, first question is, what is it that's required? And the answer is pretty simple. You're not allowed to put food scraps in the trash. The law doesn't say what you have to do with them. It just says what you can't do with them. And there are lots of options. The best option being don't produce food waste in the first place. Try to reduce the amount of food waste you generate as much as possible. And we do have separate webinars that focus just on that topic. Barring that, there are options like first feed people. If there's a way to donate the food to hungry people, that's the best use of it. Next best use is feeding animals. So if you have backyard chickens or know somebody with a farm and are able to use your food scraps that way, that's the next step down in the hierarchy. What we're going to be talking about today is the next step down, which is composting and digesting, which is the strategy that is going to be the most common one that people tend to, because no matter how frugal you are and how careful you are with your food, you're always going to have things that you can't eat, eggshells, coffee grounds. You're going to have food scraps that you can't avoid. So what are food scraps? They're the parts of food items that are typically discarded, like I was just talking about, peels, rinds, cores, pits, grounds, shells, bones, things like that. And any food that isn't eaten, plate scraping, spoiled food, for whatever reason. So all of those things are prohibited from going into your trash as of this past July 1st. Why? Partly because the law says so, but of course there are reasons why the law says so. First is that food is full of nutrients, and it's a real shame when we can't get those nutrients into our bodies, but the next best option is getting those nutrients back into the soil. It completes the cycle. So you grow food, you eat it, you put the leftovers back into the soil to grow the next generation of food, and it just keeps going. When you put those nutrients into a landfill, they're just lost. And in the process, you're using up a lot of greenhouse gases, both getting them to and from the landfill. And landfills are designed, well, backing up a step, those of you of a certain age who grew up in Vermont might fondly remember going to the town dump, which was actually just a big hole in the ground where everybody threw things. It was, a fun place for kids to, learn how to hunt by shooting the rats out there and stuff. But it was not super good for the environment. Chemicals were leaching out in liquid form, in gas form. So now we don't have those town dumps anymore. We have lined landfills, which are great in terms of keeping poisons from getting into our soil and our water reserves. But as a result, they keep everything inside, even the good stuff, even the nutrients. When food is decaying in that environment, there's no oxygen in there. Everything is just sealed up. So instead of composting and turning into nice, yummy, usable soil, it actually rots and gives off methane, which is 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Composting does produce carbon dioxide, but at much, much lower rates, and it's much less potent. And finally, it does save landfill space. Right now, about a third of what an average household sends to the landfill, or I guess before July 1st, a typical household, 1/3 of their trash was actually organic material that could have been composted instead. And a lot of people think to themselves, well, so what? It's going to break down. It breaks down when you put it in a compost pile. Why doesn't it break down in the landfill? And that's because of what we were just talking about with landfills no longer being just holes in the ground, but being hermetically sealed environments to keep dangerous chemicals from getting out into our natural world. So what does happen to food scraps in a landfill? Short answer is not much. This picture shows carrots that were dug up out of a landfill as part of a research project. And we know from a newspaper that was dug up right near them, and which was still legible, that the carrots are 10 years old. So, I mean, it's a little embarrassing to admit it, but I've had carrots end up looking almost like that in my fridge. So, and they were not in the fridge for 10 years. So if carrots are sitting in a landfill for 10 years and still look very much like carrots, you can tell that there's not a lot of decay going on. So it's a lot of people think, well, they're just going to break down and they'll squish down and plenty more stuff can fit into the landfill. And that just isn't the case. They break down very slowly. And by the time they do, that part of the landfill has long since been filled over, and it's not like they're going to be able to put something else in that space. On the other hand, if you put those same carrots into a compost pile, they break down super fast. My colleague Rhonda here did an experiment a few years ago. She put carrots inside a mesh bag, so they were easily retrievable. buried them in the middle of a compost pile, which was not really actively managed. It was essentially just a pile of dirt with occasional things being added to it. So you can see they started off looking like fresh carrots. So she pulled them out once a week and, weighed them and took pictures to see, how fast they were decomposing. You can see they were already turning mushy and starting to be hard to recognize after 2 weeks. By 4 weeks, you really couldn't tell what they were. And by 9 weeks, they were gone. I mean, they were completely returned. All those nutrients were back to the soil and you couldn't recognize the carrot. So much better option than sending stuff to the landfill. But now we get to the harder part. So who is responsible for making that happen? The short answer is everybody. And all of us who produce waste, whether it's garbage, recycling, or food scraps, we are all responsible for managing it properly. That doesn't mean that landlords and property owners are off the hook. It's not part of the solid waste requirements. The solid waste laws are, I can't think of the word, they're neutral in terms of who gets it done. That doesn't matter. They just want to know that it is getting done. The Vermont Rental Housing Health Code, on the other hand, does have some regulations, and they treat food scraps just the way they treat other waste, like trash and recycling. So a property owner's responsibility for a rental unit is to assure that arrangements are made for the removal of food scraps and to provide durable watertight containers if the food scraps are being stored on site outside people's units. So if you're going to have pickup service, for example, and have a big plastic toter there next to your trash dumpster, you need to make sure that what you're asking people to put it in is durable and watertight, just to keep it sanitary in the same way you're required to have durable watertight containers for the trash and recycling. So what does that mean exactly? In terms of what you're required to do, there isn't any right answer. Every setting is not every setting, but different settings require different solutions. You might not be legally responsible to provide the service, but you do have to be sure that it's getting done. And the most important thing is don't be a barrier. If your solution is, if you have just, one tenant, it's a duplex, you live in half of the building, tenants in the other half. If your solution is, here's a bucket, take it yourself to the drop-off center, whenever you feel the need to, that's fine from our perspective, as long as it's getting done. But you can't be a barrier to solutions you don't have to allow your tenants to do anything they want, but you can't prevent them from all of the options. You can't say, no, you can't have a backyard composter. No, you can't get pickup service. We don't have room for another container. You can't be the impediment that keeps your tenants from being able to comply with the law. At condos, co-ops, homeowners associations, it's a little bit different because the residents there own their units. So you don't have a specific legal requirement that I'm aware of, at least. So you can leave it up to individual unit owners to make their own plans. But in a lot of cases, it's advantageous to go for a shared solution, which is why a lot of condominium associations, homeowners associations exist. When you have a bunch of people living, in close proximity, why have 15 or 100 different units each hire their own trash hauler to come and pick up the trash? It's a lot more cost effective to have one contract for trash that everybody can use. And the same is true when you're thinking about recycling or food scraps. Where I live in a condominium, we've had food scraps pickup for years, and we have trash dumpsters out behind every couple of buildings. And a few years ago, we asked our trash hauler to provide food scraps toters there. So next to each dumpster, we have a food scraps toter. And all of us in our units are responsible for collecting our own food scraps and dumping them into that container, and they get picked up once a week. And, you know, the food scraps container is left with a fresh liner and starts all over again. It's a lot cheaper than if each of us wanted to hire somebody to pick up our own food scraps, although that's allowable as long as the homeowners association isn't making it impossible for their unit owners to comply. And it is important to let your homeowners know, especially if you're not going to be providing the service, make sure that your unit owners know what isn't permitted on the property. You know, are they allowed to set up their own backyard compost system? Are they allowed to install a green cone digester? Or do they have to find an offsite solution? So that leads us to, what are people supposed to do? And as I alluded to a minute ago, there are options for on-site and there are options for off-site. The on-site things are, in reality's sake, may not be as applicable in multi-unit. They may not be the right solution for multi-unit or condominium type settings. They're not going to be the right solution as often as they might be for an individual homeowner, because all of the on-site options require some amount of work, and that means that there needs to be somebody on site that's willing to do that, and there needs to be somebody keeping an eye on making sure that things are working well. And that is certainly possible, and we have condominium associations that we've worked with that have set up on-site composting, and they've had mixed results. You know, they were thrilled with how easy it was and inexpensive it was for the folks who opted in to be able to start using the on-site containers. At the same time, the on-site compost containers filled up more quickly than they had anticipated, and they ran into some problems with contamination from neighbors that hadn't opted in and hadn't gone to the trainings, but saw the containers there and just thought they'd use them. So it might be a little harder for, you know, an off-site landlord or property manager to be confident the system is going to work well. If you do go that direction, there are lots of different options. In the bottom left here, you can see on the far left of that picture is a backyard composter called a Soil Saver, and we do sell those basically at cost, so you can buy them at a discounted rate. There are also lots of ways you can just build your own setup, including that one there next to the Soil Saver is just basically 3 wooden pallets stood up and tied together, forming walls around a compost pile. Up in the top right, someone made a backyard composter out of just a regular trash can by putting in ventilation holes. In the bottom right corner is a picture of a worm bin, and that's an at-home option that would happen within a unit, not outside on the common property. That's going to be a challenging option, especially for, you know, an off-site landlord or property manager to be confident is happening. And worms you have to provide a really careful ecosystem for them. They don't take every single kind of food like some other systems do. And they require some specialized knowledge. So Rhonda here is our in-house expert on vermiculture. That's composting with worms. And we do offer specialized webinars and learning about that, as well as specialized webinars on backyard composting and all the different options there are, how to set them up and how to make them work. The green cone, which is the top left picture here, excuse me, is an option that's more likely to work for in an off-site management, on-site resident situation for a few different reasons. But there are also reasons why it might not be successful, because there are very specific site requirements for those. So just comparing the two, with backyard composting, like the soil savers or the build your own out of the pallets, you can put most food scraps, but not all of them in there. You can't put things like meat, bones, dairy, really fatty things. The good news, though, is if backyard composting is the solution you've chosen for your food scraps, you are still allowed to put those things, those food scraps that can't go into your backyard system, you are still allowed to throw those away, even after this past July 1st. So if you're backyard composting, that will take care of all of your food scraps needs between the ones you can put into the composter and the rest of them can go into your trash. Backyard composting does require more work. On the other hand, it does produce compost for you that you can use. And there are tons of ways to do it. From, you can buy containers and they can be super fancy and high tech, or there are lots of free ways to set one up yourself. The digester is a little bit different. On the one hand, it takes all food, including meat, bones, everything, even things that can't go into a backyard composter. On the other hand, that's the only thing it takes. So it won't take your leaves, yard waste, paper. So it can be a good solution if all you want to do is give your tenants or residents an option to get rid of their food scraps without putting them in the trash. It doesn't require a lot of ongoing maintenance once it's installed. And it doesn't produce compost, which you may not be an issue in a rental or co-housing situation. The big drawback, though, is it only works if it's in a really sunny spot with really well-drained soil. So if you don't have a backyard that gets full-on sun and well-drained soil, then it's not going to work well for you. So it would not be a good long-term option. It might work for a few months, but you're going to find very quickly that it's going to fill up and the food isn't going to be breaking down. But if you do have a good site, this can be an option. You can buy, we sell the green cone digesters for $130, which is at cost. And there's additional information on our website about how to make those work. Basically, you dig a hole in the ground, and the part of the green cone that isn't visible, like what you see here is the top part, which is where you put the food. Underneath that, within the ground, is a container, essentially like a laundry basket that you just bury in there. And that way, as the food breaks down, the nutrients just leach out into the soil. And it does leave behind and sort of ashy residues. So after some number of years, you'll have to dig that up and relocate it. So depending on how many folks you have, that might last you for years or might need to be moved more frequently. For the multi-unit housing situations, it's going to be more common, I think, for people to turn to off-site options. And those fall into two categories. Basically, you can drop it off yourself, or you can ask your tenants to drop it off themselves, or you or they can hire a company to come pick up the scraps from you. For drop-off options, we have 7 drop-off centers that take food scraps up to 30 gallons, so small loads. At our Williston location, there's no charge for food scraps. So you can bring small loads of food scraps there every day, up to 30 gallons, and there's no charge. At the other locations, there is a fee. It's $1 per 5-gallon bucket. And that fee is waived if you're paying for trash at the same visit. So if you already pick up the trash at your rental units and bring it to a drop-off center, you can just bring along the food scraps at the same time in the same trip, and you won't have any additional expenses for doing that. If you have a lot of properties that you're going to be gathering from and end up with larger loads, any loads greater than 30 gallons have to go directly to the Green Mountain compost operation in Williston. The fee is $60 a ton, which if my memory serves correctly, is about 3 cents a pound. And there's a $5 minimum load fee. So if you have a smallish load, you go over the scale, you dump your food scraps out, you go back, you're going to pay $5 just for having come and made the trip. And that $5 covers up to, I should know this, what's 1/12 of a ton, like 100 pounds or something of food scraps. You're all smart people. You can do the math yourself. So it's not up until you get over that weight amount that you're going to start paying more than $5. And also, all year round, we take leaves and yard trimmings there at no charge. The easiest option for offsite management of property is also, of course, going to be your most expensive, and that is to pay somebody else to do it for you. Trash haulers and anyone who provides trash services in the state are required to offer pickup services for food scraps to commercial locations like restaurants and grocery stores, but also to residential locations that have 4 units or more. So if you're dealing with a property that has 4 or more units, you can call your own trash. I mean, you can call them anyway, no matter how many units you have, to find out if they provide residential food scraps pickup. If you have 4 or more units, they're obligated to at least give you a quote. That doesn't mean it's going to be a price you like, and it's certainly an extra service, so it'll be a new charge. On the other hand, now that nothing smelly is going into people's trash, you may be able to reduce the frequency of your trash pickup, because the trash dumpster isn't going to get all smelly with food stuff in there. And if a third of people's trash is now being diverted over into the compost stream, you're probably going to see a lot less trash as well. So you may be able to either get a smaller dumpster or change from weekly pickups to bi-weekly, or from twice weekly to once, things like that. No matter whether your current trash hauler is going to provide the service or not, it's worth getting in touch with some of these other specialty companies that a few of these folks also offer trash services, but most of the ones on this list they just specialize in food scraps. And so you can hire them to pick up food scraps, no matter what method you're using to manage your trash and recycling. You don't have to be their customer for that. Now they serve different, some of them serve only certain towns, and so you'll want to check out the website here that I have highlighted down in the corner there. You'll see all these companies listed, and you can get the details on where they serve and get their contact info. But no matter whether your current trash company offers the service or not, I would strongly suggest calling at least a handful of places to compare prices, because the costs can vary pretty widely. And the companies that do nothing but food scraps pickup, they're going to view this as, a great new customer, as opposed to your trash company that's, may have, and I'm not saying they all do, but it may have a tendency to think, oh, great, now I have to provide more service to the same customer. And they're not going to want to pay a lot more money. So their pricing may not be as competitive as with the small guys who the only thing they do is food scraps pickup. So they aren't needing to use, have a different truck and different staff, making different routes. It's all they do. So they aren't absorbing all those additional costs of being in the trash hauling business. No matter what option you choose for food scraps at the property, whether it's on-site or off-site, your tenants, unit owners, residents are all going to need to do the same thing, which is collect their food scraps in their unit and then transport the food scraps to whatever storage container, whatever the next step is. If they're taking it directly to the drop-off center themselves, that's it, you're done. If you're providing pickup service, or if you yourself are going to pick up the food scraps and drop them off, you need to provide a container out there for them to use. But the key part, no matter what solution you're offering or not offering, is that it's important to give your tenants advice on how to make their indoor collection system work. Because this is actually where most of the sticking points are. You know, once people put stuff in an outside container, they don't care so much if it's smelly necessarily, you know, if it's away from their unit. But people can, you know, there's a yuck factor to collecting food scraps separately in the kitchen, which isn't entirely understandable since, you know, they were throwing that stuff in their trash anyway. So it's not like there's more smelly stuff in their kitchen. It's just concentrated into a different container. And that makes people look at it differently sometimes. So a few tips that you can provide people: have them choose a countertop container that works for them. And it doesn't need to be anything fancy. It can be something you've got lying around your house. We do sell, like 4-gallon buckets at our drop-off centers that are nice and green, and they say food scraps on them. And those are great, but you can use any old 5-gallon bucket or any old mop bucket or a bowl or, you know, a takeout container that you have sitting around, a plastic shopping bag. It doesn't make any difference what you collect it in. Then you just need to be able to take that container outside and dump the contents out. What we used growing up in our house, my mom always just kept a colander in the sink. And as we were trimming vegetables or whatever, everything just went into the colander. That way it could, you know, if there was anything goopy, you know, tomatoes, seeds, or juice, it would just drip out into the sink, go right down the drain. So it wasn't a problem. And when it was time to empty the colander, we'd stick a pie plate underneath it, walk it out the backyard, out past the garden, and toss it in the pile. The key message is you don't need to buy anything in order to be able to do this. You can use a bowl, you know, a mixing bowl that you have, just leave it out in your counter and take it outside to the food scraps container at the end of the day. Good ways to keep that indoor container from getting gross is line it with a paper bag or some newspapers or paper towels. That can just take the edge off the yuck factor that some people experience. Another good option for people like me who might be a little bit lazy and don't want to take the food scraps out every single day, or even a couple times a week. If you think it's going to be a while before you take things out, people can put stuff that's going to get stinky and just keep it in the fridge or freezer. I actually have a drawer in my fridge that's just reserved for stuff that's going to go in the compost. So when I, you know, clean up vegetables or whatever, I put them in a Tupperware container that just sits in that drawer. If, you know, there's a little bit of salsa left in a jar and it's got hidden in the back of the fridge and got moldy, I just put that jar in there. And then the day that I'm going to be taking compost out, I empty all of those containers into, you know, my indoor compost container and take it outside. Contrary to what I do, we do encourage people to empty their food scraps at least once a week to keep the likelihood of odors and fruit flies, you know, to minimize those issues. And, you know, as you know, in the summer, you're going to have more issues with that than in the winter. In the winter, when the whole world is a freezer, it can be awfully nice to just keep your 4-gallon bucket outside the back door. So you can just toss things in there every day. And then they just stay nice and not smelly outside your back door until it's time to bring them to the drop-off center or put them in the larger container. On the other hand, they can freeze in there, and sometimes it can be challenging to get them out. A tip that we have heard, but we have not experimented with directly, is spraying the inside of your bucket with like a cooking spray, or, rubbing a little oil in there. That can just keep the, sort of creates a barrier between the ice crystals and the plastic, so they don't adhere to the sides of the container. And that way it'll come out as one big frozen lump, instead of sticking to the sides. And then if the container is icky, washing it with vinegar can help a lot to reduce odors. And if it's a size that fits into your dishwasher, throw it in there, and that's can be less yucky than cleaning it by hand. And just tell folks to repeat that as often as is necessary. That's my whole spiel. I went through it a little bit quickly and didn't want to get into more detail than was needed. So now I am going to stop screen sharing and invite folks to answer any questions you have. Have any come in on the chat so far?
Nope. And we probably should have made more of an effort to make sure people know that the Q&A is how you can feel free to ask us questions, give us some comments.
Yes, I do apologize for that. I should have mentioned it at the beginning. So if you do have any questions, feel free. You can either raise your hand. There should be a little button down somewhere on the bottom of your screen. Sometimes it's hidden away under, depends on which version of Zoom you have.
Just use the Q&A.
Oh, right, that's the chat. Yes, use the Q&A. There it is,
Please.
right at the bottom. Type in your question, and we will wait here and chat amongst ourselves for a couple of minutes while people have a chance to type questions. Rhonda, Ethan, anything I left out or could have mentioned better, things that might be helpful to add?
I can't think of anything.
I'm not thinking of anything either. I think it is
It was
sort of
perfect.
find your own. That's what we're saying.
Wow, that's very exciting.
Yeah, I would just
Because we'll be
emphasize.
getting,
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, no.
No. I was just going to say that I think that the point that you did already emphasize, Robin, that I would emphasize is that it is finding your own solution. So,
Yeah.
it's going to depend on the number of units you have, the amount of land around them, how comfortable tenants are with composting, and of maybe managing an on-site pile, that kind of stuff. So a lot of variables to consider. And we're not necessarily going to direct you to one or the other. We're going to help you and sort of navigate that decision.
Right. And we are more than happy to help. If, give me a call, send us an email. My contact information was on that last slide. You'll also be getting a follow-up email that has all of that information, plus copies of these slides and links to some additional resources. Rhonda? No.
Oh, they're not getting
Well-
a copy of the slides, but you will get a link to the recording of this webinar.
So you'll be able to refresh your memory that way. But if you're trying to figure out what to do at a particular location, give me a call and we'll be happy to help you figure out what sort of options will work best for that particular setting.
There is a question.
Yeah. So
What are
what are
your
sug-
suggestions?
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't.
So what are your suggestions for ways to mitigate one tenant from spoiling the whole bin? That is the $1 million question. There is no magic wand for that. Believe me, if there was, we probably wouldn't, all of three of us probably wouldn't have jobs. We'd only need maybe one of us because we just go around waving the magic wand. It's challenging. I can't, undersell it. I mean, it is hard. Education, and signage are really your, the two best weapons. Make sure that all the tenants or residents know what belongs in the bin and what doesn't. Have signage there that's really clear. If you're seeing repeated problems, do your best, and it's not easy, we know, to try to figure out the source of the problem. You know, is there one particular unit that's causing it, or is it a more general lack of understanding?
That's what
And
I was going to
then-
suggest, Robin, is that I think you might get a couple of different containers at that point and try to put them out so that you have a better sense of which units are contributing to which containers.
Yeah,
And if you've already done general education, then that gives you an idea of who you need to continue to focus on in terms of making sure they understand what goes in there, because there is nothing more frustrating than having to toss an entire load of food scraps because you know that it's laced with plastic or something.
And you might
Right.
just want to stick strictly to food scraps, period. Like
yeah,
only food, that's it,
nothing else.
period.
Yeah.
And that
Um,
generally helps, especially like with me working in schools, that helps a lot.
Yeah, to minimize confusion. And it is important to try to, nip it in the bud, take care of it early, because once there's one thing in there that doesn't belong, the next person that comes along is going to think, oh, wow, I didn't know you could put milk cartons in there. And then they're going to start chucking their milk cartons in because they figure somebody must have known what they were doing, and there it is. So it is important to stay on top of it, to identify problems early and try to fix them so that people don't unwittingly learn things that aren't true. In addition to not wanting to spoil the batch, you don't want to cause other people to change their behavior that was good and have that go downhill.
We've certainly learned that there's lots of rumors out there about what's compostable, many of them inaccurate. So yeah, you don't want to leave it to people to sort of decide for themselves based on what they find in the bin.
Yeah. So if it was food that you would have eaten, and if it was in a different state, it can go in there. If it's part of a food item that isn't normally eaten, banana peels, apple cores, eggshells, it can go in there. Other stuff, not. Basically just any leftovers or any scraps that you create from cooking, and then anything that you don't eat, whether it's because it got burned or it got buried in the back of the fridge and you didn't find it until it was too late. There are lots of reasons, and there are strategies for trying to reduce those. And we offer a how to reduce food waste webinar as well. But we know nobody's perfect. We all have done it ourselves, but just
Another option that when I lived in a 5-unit house thing years ago, and I got rent reduction for being, it was part gardener, but also our food scrap manager, queen, compost lady. Between the gardening and the compost, or the compost management, I got $25 off my rent a month. So that might be a way to incentivize a captain, if you will, at your units.
That's a great idea. Especially if you want to do on-site composting, because you really are going to need
Or you could do it for taking it offsite too. Like that person's that compost captain or whatever, queen, king, is responsible for dropping all the food scraps off as well. So just an idea there.
That's a great one.
Yeah, could work both ways.
And may be a lot cheaper than hiring a pickup service instead.
Because that's what I did. I used to drop them off.
Yep.
We didn't compost at our house. All right. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much for participating. We are going to wrap this up. We'll send you a follow-up email, as we said, with some resources, and feel free to get in touch with us anytime. In 2 days, Rhonda says.
Excellent. Have a good day,
Thanks
guys.
for joining us, everyone.
See ya.